Welcome to the Modern Mythos Podcast, a show dedicated to Call of Cthulhu and other investigative horror games. I'm John Hook.
And I'm Seth Skorkowski, and together we'll be discussing writing, game mastering, and player tips and how you can apply them to your table. Today's episode, we're talking about insanity and bouts of madness.
All right. Well, Seth, insanity and bouts of madness. This
Oh,
is this is the cornerstone of Call of Cthulhu.
that's really what it's known for. It kind of has the distinction of being the first game that had a sort of mental hit points. Essentially, that's what sanity is. Is it's a type of mental hit points, and it was the first one to do that. You see it now in different forms in other games, but it all started here, and it's one of the big things that the game's really known for. And also, it's one of the areas that is very a lot of people's entire opinion of Call of Cthulhu is either they hate it because they hate the insanity mechanics, or they love it because they love the insanity mechanics. And when you're on a lot of the online forums, that is a common question of how do I handle insanity or bouts of madness, or
Yes.
uh, different ways that they're trying to figure out how to apply it correctly because they're not sure. So let's talk about it.
Let's talk about it. If you will indulge me, Seth, I actually would like to start this segment off with an anecdote. I have a story, if you will.
Oh,
And I recently was able to have a real life encounter. I was able to witness a bout of insanity, specifically amnesia, in real time, in real life.
okay. That you have my
So,
interest.
so give me a second here. I need to set up the story a little bit. I have a very good friend who owns a comic book store, and due to him purchasing a bunch of inventory and stuff, he was going to have a huge sale of games and comics and all kinds of stuff, and it was going to be held at this like convention arena kind of thing. And he asked, me and a bunch of other friends of the shop to participate in helping him sell stuff off and everything. And it was just a great excuse to basically hang out all day with my comic book shop friends who I've known for decades, right?
Yeah.
And so it was on Saturday, October 30th, and I was so looking forward to it. And I was going to be helping with the setup and tear down and all this stuff. I left my house at 6 a.m. in order to go to this thing. And my family, my wife and my kids, they knew that I was going to be gone and out of pocket all day long because I was going to be at this convention center. So at noon, my phone buzzes, and I take it out of my pocket, and I look at it, and I receive a text message. Now, I've been at this convention center now for like 6 hours, right? I get a text message, I look at it, and it's my son, and in all caps, it says, "Come home now, something's wrong with mom." And I'm staring at this thing going, "What the
That's
what?"
that's not a message you ever want to get.
No, no. And as I'm about to, I'm not even sure what I was going to do. I was either going to text my son, or I was going to, call the phone and place a phone call. But I'm staring at my phone, and I'm about to touch it to do something when suddenly my phone starts ringing, and caller ID says it's my wife. And so after seeing that message from my son, I answer it, and I I mean, the greeting was, "What's wrong?" And I received, she was on the phone, and she had that voice of, if a loved one has ever called you or talked to you where they are in a absolute state of panic and terror, that was her voice. She was, I could tell, in tears. She was crying and calling me and saying, "Help me, please come home. I don't know what's wrong. I've called 911." I'm like, I'm on my way, and I just ran out of this place. One of my friends saw me as I was running past him, and all I had time to say was, "Kara's in trouble," and I just ran out.
Yeah, yeah. No time to like explain to anybody.
Yeah,
Just
no
go.
time to explain anything to anyone. I'm just hauling ass. And before I go any further, because this really was a very terrifying event, I do want to kind of skip to the end and say my wife is completely fine and everything is a-okay. I just want to put that out there. She is awesome and everyone is healthy and safe. So the story has a happy ending. So I'm going to go ahead and put that out there. But rewinding back to when it was in the moment, of course, when I want to be able to drive 90 miles an hour zipping through traffic, that's when I'm stuck behind every slow person there is between the convention center and my house. But I finally do make it to the house, and the ambulance and a fire truck, a full on ladder truck with firemen, but also the firefighter paramedics, all these people are at my house. And so I just whip into a parking spot. I jump out, and there was a paramedic or an ambulance paramedic, and who saw me, and we kind of made eye contact. And he goes, "Husband," and I went, "Yes." And so he pointed at this door on the side of the ambulance, and I jump into this ambulance. And because I came in from the side, I was right by my wife's head and shoulders because she was strapped on a gurney and loaded into the ambulance through the large back doors. This is where I start getting my first witnessing of this bout of madness, this thing. So I come in and I touch my wife on the shoulder and I said, "Honey, I'm here." And she, cranes her neck up and looks up at me, and she sees me, and I can see the relief on her face. But then the relief kind of passes as she kind of like suddenly sees something out of the corner of her eye, and she kind of starts tracking it with her eyes, and her head starts to turn, and I'm looking at her face and I'm seeing this look of confusion, like she doesn't, I mean, you could see it in her face. She did not know where she was or what was going on. And that
Yeah, it's got
was
to be terrifying.
scary. And she starts saying, she goes, "I'm having a stroke." And my breath stopped. And I look at the paramedic who's helping her. And then this is when confusion also starts to set in because she says, "I'm having a stroke." And I go, and I look at the paramedic, and he's slowly and silently just shaking his head no. And I'm like, "What? Why is he saying no?" So, and this was a little weird. I really wish the paramedic had addressed this emergency with a little more, you know, vigor. But I guess in hindsight, what had happened is these paramedics, they had done a field assessment and determined she was not having a stroke. And because she wasn't having a stroke, they were not, she wasn't having a life threatening situation. So they weren't trying to make any promises that she was going to get emergency care immediately. So they start talking about, well, what hospital do you want to go to? They're all backed up. It could be hours before she gets seen. And she's like, "Hours? I'm having a stroke." And he's again shaking his head no. And I said, "Well, take her to hospital, go to that hospital." And I tell my wife, I said, "I'm going to take the kids to our friend Barb's house." I said, "I'm going to take the kids to Barb's, and then I will meet you at the hospital." And I get out of the ambulance. It goes away to go to the hospital, and I gather the kids. I'm driving the kids from our house to our friend Barb's house, and on the way, my phone rings, and it's my wife, and she says, "They put me in a wheelchair and parked me in the waiting room lobby, and I'm having a stroke, and I don't know what to do." And I said, "Honey, I will be there as soon as I can. I got to take the kids to Barb's. All right. Just hang tight. I'll be right there." I love you. She says, okay, I love you. She hangs up. I'm driving, maybe a minute or two later, my phone rings. It's my wife again. I go, honey, is everything okay? She goes, they put me in a wheelchair. They parked me in the waiting room, and I don't know when I'll see them. And I'm having a stroke. I'm like, are you punking me? I mean, what's going on here, right? So, I can obviously, her tensions are high, and I'm like, okay, you're repeating yourself, but that's fine. She ends up calling me like twice more before I can finally get back, drop the kids off and get to the hospital. And I see the nurse who's doing intakes, and I said, my wife, I think she's having a stroke. And he says, she's not having a stroke. We think it's a panic attack. And I was like, really? Yep, she totally passes the stroke assessment test. She's not having a stroke. I was like, okay, that's weird. So I went and sat with her in the hallway, and we ended up having these repeated cyclical conversations. She was like trying to make these assessments for herself as I came and sat by her, and she totally knew who I was. But I sat by her, and she was like, now I'm just guessing because I'm looking out the window and I see the weather outside. Is it October? I went, yeah. Is it close to Halloween? I said, Halloween's tomorrow. No, it isn't. I said, yeah, it is. She goes, oh, this is weird. I'm just guessing because I'm looking out the window. I said, okay. And then there was a pause, and she goes, I'm just guessing because I'm looking out the window, but is this October? I went, yeah. Is it close to Halloween? It's tomorrow. And I mean, for like 20 minutes, we
Oh
just had
God.
this cyclical conversation over and over and over again. She had a 6-second memory, and she was forgetting everything, conversations, all this stuff. But anything long term, me, herself, she knew her name, and she knew, because my wife is an incredibly intelligent woman. She truly is the smartest person I know, and she's very informed on her own medical issues and medications and all that stuff. So she could answer all these questions for the doctors, but anything immediate, anything short term, no clue, nary a clue. So finally, we do get into the emergency room, and the wonderful doctors and nurses start doing a battery of testing for her.
Mhm.
And after like a couple of hours, finally this doctor comes in and introduces himself, and he says, Mrs. Hook, this was a diagnosis of elimination. We tested you for this and this and this, and it's none of these things. And because you're not having any of these other issues, we have determined that you are suffering from transient global amnesia.
Oh,
And my wife just looks at him, and I swear to God, just deadpan, she goes, that's a bullshit diagnosis. And the doctor was so hilarious. He just silently just kind of shrugged his shoulders like, what am I gonna tell you?
that's the last thing you want your doctor to
I
do.
know. And then my wife is like, that's a soap opera diagnosis. What's gonna happen next? Am I gonna what did she say? Oh, she goes, and what am I gonna do? Am I gonna levitate? And the doc, without missing a beat, he goes, I'd like to see that. But
So, so
yeah,
transient global amnesia.
transient meaning it happens just spontaneously with no rhyme or reason. Literally, if you look up transient global amnesia in the Mayo Clinic definition online, which it's out there, I have looked at it several times, it does not have a known trigger. Medical science has not figured out what causes it, but it is incredibly rare. So that's the transient portion of it. It has no known trigger, and it's also short term. Global, meaning it affects the entire brain. It's not localized to certain parts of the brain. It can affect the entire brain, global. And then, of course, amnesia is amnesia. And so this transient global amnesia, it just basically heals itself. If a person does get affected and inflicted with this transient global amnesia, you're looking at a 6 to 8 hour period of being affected by it. But then after that, your memories start coming back and everything is fine. The only thing that is ever long term about it is the actual 6 to 8 hours where you were, you know, grossly impacted by it, where it was at its strongest. Those events never come back. My wife, she has no memory of riding in an ambulance and going to the hospital. She has no memory of sitting in that wheelchair parked in the waiting room and making phone calls to me over and over and over again, telling me that she was in a wheelchair parked in the waiting room. Her memories of that day are around breakfast, or it was like a late, we'll call it a brunch, right? It was the
Mhm.
kids and my wife slept in since I left so early, but she was having a late breakfast, and then suddenly after the late breakfast she was in a hospital gown at the hospital with no idea how she got from point A to point B, and that has never come back. But it was so bizarre. And odds are, if a person ever has this transient global amnesia, they will never have it again. And
Oh,
it doesn't, and it has no ill impacts on dementia or anything else in later in life. So once all the terror was done and
yeah,
over with,
yeah.
I started just absorbing this thing, going, this is so cool. I can apply my actual practical experiences now to Call of Cthulhu.
Well, what a terrible way of learning that. Well, I'm really happy she is okay. Two, my God, that sounds horrifying at a level I can't really wrap my head around. But as far as Bout of Madness, you and I have discussed before. I always found the amnesia one difficult because that might be one of the things that happens to an investigator.
Yep.
And then let's just, I went ahead and pulled it up. So, according to the book, the investigator has no memory of events that have taken place since they were last in a place of safety. For example, it seems to them they were one moment sitting eating breakfast, and the next they're facing a monster, and then it can last for a few rounds. Your wife's definitely fell into that category of the eight 1d10 hours of fate if
Hmm.
it lasted that long. So if she just had a 6 second memory, and that lines up around when a Call of Cthulhu round is, it would be you don't remember everything that happened to that previous round. So I guess it would be you see the monster, you fail your sanity check, you don't remember anything. So I guess that the next one you probably turn and run, but the next one you wouldn't even remember why you were running or where you are. And it's I've never actually done it where every round you would start over again. But my God, that sounds so terrifying.
Seriously. And it seems like it would be so much with this experience, and hopefully, you know, with my tale, it will help other keepers out there. You'll be able to kind of curtail and shape a bout of madness that involves amnesia so that it can best fit your situation. Yeah, I mean, out of sight, literally with amnesia, out of sight, out of mind, right? If you were to see the monster, have the amnesia, and escape to the next room, and suddenly you're in the next room and you're like, I don't remember why I came in here. Well, maybe I can search the room for clues, or, oh, I hear a noise out in that other door. I wonder what that is. Oh my God, it's a monster again, right? You know?
God. Well, because also there'd be things like adrenaline that dumped when you were running.
Hmm.
It would still be in your system. You
Oh,
just
yeah.
you just wouldn't know why. It'd basically be you. you have that mental reset. You don't know why you were terrified, but all of that's still going through you. Your heart is still racing. Fight or flight mode is still, you know, ramped up, but you don't know why you're. Yeah, and I guess that would lead to thoughts of they're having a panic attack or that. But okay, well,
Yeah,
that's
yeah.
a
I mean,
really horrible way to learn how to do a bout of madness.
yes,
My
yeah.
God.
I mean, I could see justifications now where, because like you said, your adrenaline is up and everything's pumping, you know, during that bout of madness, I would maybe apply bonus dice for skills that you're attempting to do, because your acuity and your reflexes are all heightened. You're really at this top speed, your body is moving, mind and body is moving at top speed. But yeah, you would just have these, like, just, I don't know why I came in the room. I don't know what's going on here. I don't remember what's going on there. And just, it's round by round by round like that. And
Wow.
you could misinterpret things and go, why do I feel like I'm in danger? She was interpreting it as, I must be having a stroke because,
And you can't
because,
and you
you
can't
know,
convince her because she won't remember that you told her she's not having a stroke. She would make that diagnosis over and over and
over,
over.
which she did. Yeah.
Oh,
Over and over and over.
wow. Well, I am glad she is okay. And that is that is a level of terrifying. I don't. Wow, man, this got too real. This isn't my
It
imagination
was,
game.
yeah.
Jesus.
Yeah, it was a super interesting day for sure. So,
But let's bring this to the game
yeah.
to go over everything. Insanity is one of those areas that I think is it's rather simple, but at the same time it can get complicated. And I think it also has a lot of spots where people misinterpret it. And I think that's also made worse when you do open up a lot of the older scenarios from the 80s. I think there was a lot of spots where I think the writers of certain scenarios misinterpreted it, and they kind of set down a foundation of misinterpretation that has lasted for now 40 years. Sanity is supposed to be when you discover something about the mythos and it's chipping away at your mind, but it also means shocks to your stability. So that's why a lot of scenarios might have jump scare moments, like you walk into a dark room and you see a reflection, roll sanity, and you kind of jump and you realize, no, it's just your self reflection. And I always kind of feel like those are kind of cheap gags. Personally, if there was anywhere in the game that I would want to actually like overhaul sanity, I would almost want to break it down to where there was temporary sanity loss for those. And then there was real sanity loss for seeing a deep one or actual supernatural mythos threats, because you might have a temporary loss of sanity due to see, I just recently run the necropolis, where you get trapped in a tomb, and there's an immediate you get trapped in the tomb. It opens with save for your sanity because you just realized you're trapped in a tomb. Yes, that should be troubling. Yes, that should result in some reaction. But as far as a permanent, or not necessarily permanent, but the long term sanity loss that you have in Call of Cthulhu, I wouldn't rate that on the same scale I would do seeing a deep one or any of the supernatural things that can
Hmm.
occur. And I think because of that, I'm a little bit more liberal when it comes to sanity rewards at the end of a scenario than a lot of other GMs are, because those I kind of see as you should be able to heal faster from those than, if a dark young comes out and it costs you, 1d10, it should, because it's a freaking dark young.
Hmm. Yep. 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 With sanity, and I agree with you. There are moments when the a sanity loss shouldn't be debilitating, but having sanity loss can still be a an element to the narrative of the game where the player will get a sense of, yeah, this is shaking me up. So when I'm writing or running scenarios, if I feel like the cause of the sanity loss isn't something that is even worthy of a potential bout of madness, occurring, I make sure that the sanity loss is just really low. It's 1, it's 1d2, it's maybe 1d3, but I make it really low, and there's no chance of having an insane event occur. But if it is with a monster or something like that, some of these monsters in the books, you might see if you make your sanity roll, the the low end loss sometimes is just a 1. And I'm like, that doesn't seem that doesn't seem realistic enough for seeing a monster, and you were successful in your sanity law,
Now,
in a sand
if
roll.
I think if you do make your sanity check, if you let's say your sanity is 50, we have 50-50 chance of making it, and you see something so horrible that let's say the damage on it is 1/1d8. If you make it, you still lose 1. It's still chipping away a little bit. But if you fail it, you could still only lose 1.
You could, yeah.
You could fail it, roll a 1 and a d8, and you're just as bad off, I guess, as the person who had saved it. So I'm personally fine with that. I have seen certain scenarios where I think they were a little too free with guaranteed sanity loss versus you have to save in order to have any, where even if you made every sanity save in the whole thing, by the end of the scenario, if you went through the whole thing, you're down 15 sand. And it's like, that's a little extreme because that was 15 1 points of sand.
Mhm.
But, and like I said, I have a different feeling when it comes to jump scare moments. Though I do think they deserve a role, I'm not as much inclined to have it be at the end of the scenario. That is just as hard to recover from as seeing some alien horror. Now, one thing that I do love, and I don't really think gets implemented enough, and to go back to the necrops, I have it on my brain. I actually just did a review of this thing.
Mhm.
Is
Which was
and
awesome, I just saw it.
and I love this about this adventure is you get your 4 pregens. Tons of adventures have pregens. This one comes with tips to run these 4 pregens if they suffer sanity loss, and it includes involuntary actions. So one of them, like you faint for 1 round, because when you suffer any loss, 1 point or 20 points, there should be a response from the character that they don't have. And so instead of it just being like, okay, take off 1 point and everybody marks it off, and then we just keep going like nothing happened. There needs to be a reaction from the character. So it gave a different reaction for each and every one of them. Like, the professor of languages, he screams something in a foreign language. So, the monster comes out and he's like, Scheisse, or yells, something in one of the languages that he knows that is not English. Or one of them, whatever they're holding, they throw it at the nearest target. Like it is like their fight or flight mode goes on, and they immediately go into fight, and they just sling the flashlight or whatever they're holding at something and make a cup of tea. Who knows? And I wish that that was actually pointed out more in a lot of scenarios as far as what that should be, because those do kind of create those fun little moments of that initial reaction. They're not going through a bout of madness, but for 1 round, they drop their flashlight or they break whatever they're holding or yell out an expletive or faint or who knows. And I think a keeper should actually put some thought into these and basically have a post-it note with a bunch of little ones. And if your characters that you've played with a lot, kind of get some kind of old standbys that you could have, like these are the reactions that so and so would mostly have. And I don't think it's a bad idea to even sit down with the player and come up with those beforehand, where it's like, hey, can everybody give me 5? And I might come up with 5 more and determine what they are on the fly. So you're not naming the only ones you're going to have, but I think it'd be good if a player can kind of help come up with what would my character do if they had a surprise. It's not enough for a bout of madness, but what would that reaction be? And I think that is a cool way to also give players a bit of ownership over how their own character would react or could react.
I love this idea because you could also layer it in where, especially if it's one that the player helped create, when the keeper is reflecting that back to the player, so maybe the player says, maybe out of the corner of my eye, I think I see something moving in the shadows, right? That's all. Doesn't really do anything. It's just, I thought I saw movement out of the corner of my eye. And you could reflect that back to the player. The player will just assume that that is, because I lost 1 point of sanity, or, I saw something, kind of weird, some weird writing or something, and the glyphs kind of moved in front of my eyes. I can just, as a player, assume that that's just the keeper putting in that bit of color. But what if at one point you say you think you see movement out of the corner of your eye, and the player just is hand waving it, going, "Oh, that's right, because that's something I established as a mild bit of
No, one of my likely
sanity."
responses, yeah.
Likely responses, and yet now it actually is something moving in the shadows, right? You could, so you could even catch your players, with their guard down, if you can play into something like that and escalate it on them without them realizing it.
Well, this is a great segue into the next part I wanted to talk about, which is delusions. So, if it's something like that, it could be you see something moving at the corner of your eyes, and the player's kind of used to this is something my character does. I'll look, there's nothing there. And then the keeper can at one point have it be, well, there actually is something there. Or it's a delusion. And you don't tell your player it's a delusion. So they might turn and now they see something weird or some hallucination. And delusions, I fully admit I am terrible at using delusions properly, but when I have, my best memories of ever running a game with a character that went insane always involved a delusion. So whenever I do it right, it is always the perfect score, the story we tell for years and we love. I'm just terrible about like pulling them in right. It's just I've got a perfect success rate when I do. But one of the areas though that delusions in the book always kind of describes like, oh, they see things as monsters. But one of the spots where I ended up using it effectively was a character got a phone call and he was holding his phone up to his ear. We were doing the derelict, and he got a call on a satellite phone, and it was from the rescue choppers that were there. And the phone didn't ring. He's just holding this phone up to his ear, and he is convinced the choppers are there. And he takes down the barricades, and they go running out on the deck of the ship as he's waving his arms, talking to someone that's not actually on the phone. And when he got outside, he could hear the helicopters, through his other ear, because this was all just this fantasy. And have you
Hmm.
ever read World War Z?
I have not.
Okay, dude, I know what I'm getting you. In the book World War Z, it's nothing but they're basically short stories of people's firsthand accounts of what happened during the Great Zombie War. And one of them is a pilot who goes down in the bayous of Louisiana, and she spends the whole time on the radio with this person. And then at the end, it realized the radio was broken the whole time, but she has all these conversations and all these things. And the person on the radio hears things that she should have heard. Like at one part, she's kind of in despair of I'm so screwed. I'm in the middle of nowhere. I'm 1,000 miles from the nearest outpost, and there's a million zombies around me. And she starts having a breakdown. And the person on the radio is like, "Hey, what was that?" And she stops crying and she looks around and she sees that there are some zombies have started toward her. And she's like, "Yeah, she saved my ass." And as she's giving the story for the book to a reporter, she still believes that whoever she was on the phone with was real. even though the reporter interviewing her knows already that her radio was broken, that they never found anybody that was a radio operator with that name or any of that. So the delusion helped the investigator, but to them was totally real. It wasn't a monster, it wasn't a threat, it was actually a friend that popped up. So I like the idea of delusions don't have to be threatening, they
Yep.
just have to be delusions.
I love them as well. I was, in fact, and I'm echoing because I agree. When you use a delusion well in a game, it is so memorable. I used it one time where the uh, the PC did not see the monster. What had happened is the monster kind of stepped out, and he had this bout of madness. And instead of him seeing the monster, and he had put in his character background how his character is is the big disappointment in his family, and that his parents, he was from like a dilettante of some sort, and his parents were always disappointed in this kid, and and now he still has those parental issues even as an adult. And so when he had this bout of madness, it just struck me as we were playing, and I said, "Oh, no, no, no. Your dad has your both your mom and your dad are there, and now your dad is really laying into how he's disappointed in you, and that you haven't lived up to your full potential. You are embarrassing the family." And he was like, "Oh, man." And he was just getting him down, and his dad was like, "Come here and sit down." And so he went over and sat in this chair, and the other characters are trying to make their escape, and they're like, "What are you doing? Come!" And he's not even really hearing his companions. He just sits down in this chair. This was the end of that character because the monster came up and was able to just envelop his arms around him as he's sitting in the chair. And it was his, he was thinking it was his mom and his dad, with his dad laying into him, and his mom coming up and going, "It's going to be okay, honey. I know you're trying your best." They're treating him as a child even though he's a full grown adult. And it was the monster just nom, 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 and the other guys are like, "He's gone, let's go," right? And he's screwed, and they just ran off. But yeah, he died thinking that he was being berated by his parents.
Well, and the significant person is part of what a player should be filling out on their character sheet, and so that, to me, that would be the first thing I would gravitate to if they're pulling in a delusion of a person. It'd probably be their significant person, and significant doesn't mean it's necessarily a good relationship. I had one player. I remember his most significant person was his ex-wife, Ethel, the most evil woman who ever walked the earth or something. I forgot what his description was. It was just glorious. he absolutely hated his ex-wife. So with a delusion, I'd be inclined to be like, "Oh, we're pulling in this ex-wife," because that to him was the most just horrible thing. And I once again, I think that's an area that really keepers should put a little bit of thought into before a game. And that way, if something does pop up in a game and you want to do a good bout of madness, you can pull in something related to a delusion. Or if that character is obsessed with, I need something, like in our case, I want to get rescued, I'm waiting for the helicopters to come rescue us. He has a bout of madness or is going through temporary insanity, and I can do delusions. Well, then we're going to give him what he wants, which is this thing. And from just the game mechanics side, they were barricaded up, or I was going to have to like have the monster break down barriers and blah blah blah. Or I could have it inside a character to tear down the barriers from the inside and go charging outside. That's a lot scarier for the rest of the PCs trying to wrestle them to the ground as the PC is undoing all of this great fortifications that they've already done. Yeah, so I like the idea of like the repeat imaginary friend that pops up, or the call on the phone, or different things like that. And sometimes they can help. And that's also could come into insane insights, which insane insights are a great way of getting information to your players that either A, they haven't figured out, Or B, here's a clue that you probably wouldn't have figured out by an insane insight. It doesn't even have to make sense because it's insane.
Yep.
So if they have
It's an
the
insane epiphany.
yeah, so if they have the amulet of whatever and they don't know how to operate the amulet or whatever because they haven't made it to the lighthouse where the book is that says how to use it, but they go insane, you might give them an insight of I know how to use this amulet. Even
Yeah,
though there's no way that character could have possibly learned that
I'm supposed to
yet.
lick it and then put it on my eyeball. That's what I'm supposed to do.
Oh, hey,
And
maybe
then it
they're right.
works. And it
Maybe they're
works.
not. I have used them for cases where like you're kind of they're kind of stuck, and it's like, do I want to do an idea roll here to kind of get them back on track? And then somebody goes insane. It's like, oh, this is even better than an idea roll. I can just straight up tell them, here's your insane insight, and they can then act on that. I think that is one of those another tool that I don't think a lot of game masters think about of how much that has saved my butt as far as getting the game going again, or at least in a direction where they're working their way towards the conclusion.
Oh yeah. I mean, it's also a reward kind of for going that far down into the rabbit hole, that insane rabbit hole, you know?
Yeah, I like that because I was actually reading a thing earlier today on how some players they feel like the insanity can take away the player's agency. Our job is to investigate the Mythos threat, but then when we investigate the Mythos threat, we get punished, and they feel like sanity or insanity is a punishment for playing the game. So I like the idea that you can do insanity as a benefit. You know, if so and so hadn't gone insane, they wouldn't have got the insane insight, or they wouldn't have had the help, quote unquote, of their imaginary friend who might actually be giving them clues like, hey, what was that over there? Or voicing certain things in their ear. And sometimes they might not be helpful, but other times that's a good way for a game master to assist indirectly, or I guess it directly indirectly. And I think that'd be really good for one-on-one games or smaller groups where it might just be you and one player, where they might have that imaginary friend that pops up during insanity to help them out. Uh, but because that's they don't have a teammate except for their friend that just seems
Mm-hmm.
to pop up at the worst times.
Yep. Yep. Just like I can't remember the characters' names, but from The Sixth Sense, the little boy who keeps seeing Bruce Willis. I mean, that's his imaginary friend. Who keeps showing up. It's a ghost, but it works in the same way where no one else interacts with that character.
Huh. Or the Walking Dead, where Daryl's brother showed up for a while. It is after his
Right.
brother was gone, and because it's been years since I saw it, but he was hallucinating his brother, who the whole time was like encouraging him to keep going, even if that encouragement was, Daryl has to prove his brother wrong. Like, well, you can't possibly get across that. And, Daryl's like, screw you. I'm going to prove you wrong. And he jumps across it. So it is that way. He was being assisted. He's given the motivation to do
Mm-hmm.
it by his own subconscious. And that's how an insane insight or a delusion could work, because you can't have your delusion deliver the insane insight to you, which I think is a cool way of doing it. And the other thing with insanity that I personally think is a valuable keeper tool is when a character goes through a bout of madness, they have the option, once again, option to change a fundamental thing about that character on their backstory, like what's their most significant person or place, or how do they look, how do they carry themselves.
Mm-hmm.
And that's an area that I think is very valuable, but I also consider it kind of high risk. That if a keeper does it well, it's beautiful. If a keeper does it poorly, it's going to turn off a lot of players because the players understandably don't want their character changed against their will. I don't blame any player for getting upset that the keeper essentially took their character and twisted them around on them. But if it's done well, the player will even go, yeah, that makes sense of how to do that. To give you an example, is in our Pulp Cthulhu game, which started off with Call of Cthulhu and then morphed into Pulp Cthulhu, and is a very long-term game. A couple years we've played these characters. Two of them are cousins that originally one of them did not like the other. But they have a wonderful Laurel and Hardy sort of shtick, crazy man, sane man, the classic comedy duo. And during a bout of madness, and it was actually in The Lost Expedition, written by one of us. One of the changes that I made is the character that didn't really like his cousin, who is the kind of flighty one. She became his most significant person. And his big motivation became he has to protect her. And they have role played this to the hilt ever since then. Of this is my most significant person. I must protect her essentially from herself because she's the one that would always charge into the door first to learn the forbidden knowledge. And, and when I gave that to the player, he's like, "Yeah, that makes sense. That works. Like that is a natural evolution of how I would of what I would do." So I think a keeper should remember that they have the option to change things about the character, but they should make sense as far
Mhm.
as their reasoning behind it, because this is how you get that character to evolve. A lot of times the player will do that, but it's never officially like on the sheet. This is a way I think the keeper can step in and go, I think this is a direction we were going to go eventually. We're just going to fast forward it or make it official that you've been playing this way for a while, but this is what's on your sheet. We're just going to cement it that this is actually the most significant person or place or thing based off of how you've played it and or where you were going with your playing. I'm going to take that last step for you versus throwing something random that the player is understandably kind of peeved about because like
Right. Right.
why is this here?
You know, I will admit that that particular aspect of the insanity mechanic is one that I forget often. In fact, I can't think of an instance where I have modified a character's sheet due to a bout of insanity. It feels like on the initial surface, it feels like that is a mechanic that is really best suited for campaign play. And admittedly, most of my Call of Cthulhu gaming is incredibly short term, mostly one shots, convention play, that kind of thing. Not a lot of like long term campaigns. But as I was thinking, because I wanted to bring this up and say that point, but at the same time as I was thinking about it, I was like, that's not necessarily true. There's no reason why in a single one shot you couldn't augment the character sheet after a bout of insanity and actually have it be something poignant for that game, for that session, because the book, which it's on pages 156 and 157 of the Keeper Rulebook, there are some samples on things that you could do, and one of the things that I just kind of glanced at as we were talking about this is if the keeper was to maybe make a an adjustment to the significant people portion of a character's character sheet, you could say things like, and this is right from the book here, can't rest until Delbert Smith is in his grave. You could do something like that to a character in the game session and have it be naming one of the other characters, right? You know, maybe there was a conflict earlier in the role playing that the players were playing out, and they thought that was funny. Maybe it was a neat little thing to kind of butt heads about and whatever. But now, after this bout of madness, that PC, he feels wronged, and he's gonna take his vengeance out, and he won't rest until that happens. By the end of that game session, he's going to see justice meted out,
Uh,
for whatever kind of wrongness he felt, implied or not.
Now, or you could have it where if you have the player who is their character, let's say, is just not being a team player. We've all had that one. It's kind of like pulling teeth to get them to work with the rest of the party. That is an easy way of fixing it. Is if one of the other party members becomes their most treasured person, such as I have to protect them, or I have to prove them wrong, or something that at least gets them to be motivated with from each other to have some sort of relationship. Like I said, it's a small thing, and I really wouldn't recommend that keepers ever do like that. Never do it every time they have a bout of madness. That's way too much, and I wouldn't even do it at most more than once a session or adventure. I can go several adventures and not ever do it. And other times I'm like, give me your character sheet, and we'll make a small tweak. So I do it in campaign play very sparingly, but I try to be regular, as in about every other adventure, someone will have something change. But I only do it if it kind of makes sense that that's kind of the where it was going to go, or how they've already been playing it. We're just going to make it official now. And another thing with campaign play that so you're probably not as used to it is Mythos hardened.
Right.
For example, a deep one, they're worth 1d6. If your characters start coming across deep ones, once they've lost 6 points of sanity from dealing with deep ones, that's it. They're not going to keep suffering sanity loss from seeing deep ones, at least for the course of that adventure. And then after the investigator development phase, whatever their level of hardness that they've had is, it goes down by one. It kind of slowly goes away. Memories fade or whatnot. And I remember some time ago when I was talking to a gentleman who was explaining to me why he dislikes the game. His example had to deal with, they were like investigating a house and there was blood on the floor, and they had to make sanity, save sanity, and they lost 2 points. And they go to the next room, there's more blood on the floor, and they had to save sanity, and there was 2 more points. And the next room, and the next room, and the next room, and by the end they're all insane. But all that ever happened was there's blood on the floor. And I was trying to explain, I was like, well, your keeper wasn't doing that right.
Yeah.
Like, first off, that wasn't the game. That was your keeper. But even if there was something that could drive you insane like that, if it hits a point, you've hit your max, it's not going to affect you anymore. And so whenever we're doing a campaign or something, or if I know there's going to be a lot of a monster in a one shot, I'll tell them, write down how much you lost versus this. I need you to keep track, because once they hit that threshold, it's not going to affect them anymore. So if they come across a deep one, they lose 3. Next time they do, they lose 4. Well, they already lost 3, so they're only going to lose 3 this time. Now they're at 6. They're fine for the rest of this scenario. The next one, we'll drop that 6 down to a 5, and they can lose up to 1. So if you are having a campaign where you're fighting a regular opponent, such as when we did Two-Headed Serpent people, after a while,
Right.
they didn't
Yeah.
have a bad reaction to just seeing a serpent person. They might have a reaction to what the serpent person does, but seeing a serpent person wasn't hurting them anymore. They might lose 1 because it's been a session or so since they saw one, but that's it. It wasn't going to keep drilling them lower and lower.
Yeah, that is
And
also a mechanic that, yeah, I forget about in these one shots that I keep playing.
well, haven't you been playing Azathoth?
Yes, which we did complete. You can see the
Oh, you
whole
did.
thing. Yep, it's all done.
Oh,
You can see the
congratulations.
entire campaign on the Into the Darkness channels.
Oh, okay. I've never even read that one, so I I didn't know how much longer you had in it.
It was a ton of fun. We played for a year.
God, that had to be so weird for you, Mister. I only do one
I
shots.
know it was very strange. I was out of my comfort zone, but it was awesome.
So I I love I love doing one shots. To me, they're like a little horror movie. But we basically dusted off our old Pulp Cthulhu campaign earlier this year. We pulled a bunch of characters that we haven't played in a long time, and we were going to play just kind of a session with them, and then we were probably going to flip over to something else. And we were so happy with these old characters that we're like, yeah, screw what our plans were, what we were going to play next, and we just picked the campaign right up where we stopped. So we've now carried these characters from like 1921. I think we're in like 1933 right now, over all these years, and we're having a hoot. This weekend, I'll be running the Crimson Letters with them.
Ooh,
So
nice.
we'll see how that goes, and then I've got a couple more plans of what we might do afterwards. Kind of depends on how it works. I usually try to be about two scenarios ahead of
Hmm.
where I am, just to lay down any foreshadowing if I need to. And one other area that I think is kind of important. There's an optional rule in the investigator's guide dealing with basically packages like the soldier package or
Right.
the medical package, criminal package, and among them are certain things that do not cause sanity loss anymore, such as doctors no longer suffer sanity loss from viewing horrific wounds. The concept being is they've witnessed enough horrific wounds over the course of their career that shouldn't affect them anymore. Essentially, they've become hardened to it. Criminals are no longer, violence doesn't mess with them anymore because they're a mobster. They've probably stuck people's heads in vices. It does come with an initial sanity loss when you start the character, but then that's it. Never again. And one of the things I think I'd like to see addressed in campaign play is ways that can be incorporated. Because if you do play a doctor, but you don't get the package, but you've played 5, 6 adventures, when do you just have that?
Right.
It,
Yeah.
or even if you're not a criminal or a soldier, and you're doing a lot of just violence, and you're in a high combat game, at what point do we just ignore that? I've done it, but I've never made it a formal announcement. I just stop bringing it up because, as far as I'm concerned, we've hit that point. I don't want to nickel and dime them over, or essentially punish them, because I feel like they've already paid that price, and then they've actually paid that price a couple times.
Hmm.
Eventually, it's just a moot point. They've become mythos hardened or sand hardened in these regards, but we never wrote it down anywhere. I just remember this. Uh, but I think there should be a tool or something that can kind of help keepers gauge when that might be time. Because I'm doing it based off of a lot of experience. If somebody picks the books up today, they don't have that. And there's nothing really there that helps kind of guide them as at what point do we need to stop sandlossing them for this.
Yeah, that's a good point. I mean, just from the top of my head, I would think something between 6 and 10. But yeah, that's a great idea.
Actually, I miss. I was wrong. That is not Mythos hardened. Mythos hardened is something else. That is getting used to awfulness. Mythos hardened, and this is a great one. When your Mythos skill, your Cthulhu Mythos skill, is higher than your sanity,
Oh,
even for a moment. So it doesn't have to be permanent. Even for a moment, your Cthulhu Mythos skill is higher than your current sanity. You only suffer half loss from sanity forever. So
that's awesome.
in our campaign, long-term characters that we've got that have somehow survived a long time. We have one of them is working her way towards permanent insanity. We're kind of all looking forward to it because she's getting close, because she's never found a Mythos book she didn't want to read. Her Cthulhu Mythos is at 51. And but long before that, I think when her Cthulhu Mythos was like in the 20s or so, her sanity got battered down so low it went below that Cthulhu Mythos. And then they completed the adventure, they got some sanity rewards, she went to therapy, yada yada yada. But ever since that moment, whenever she has suffered sanity loss, she only does half, round up. So you're always going to lose one, even if it comes to 0.5. But so there's kind of a rapid loss of sanity at the beginning of a character. But if their Cthulhu Mythos goes up, all of a sudden it really slows down drastically because they're no longer suffering the full effects. And I think in campaign play, that is actually very, very valuable.
Oh, yeah.
And the only reason she hasn't gone permanently insane was that. And then when we did our two-headed serpent campaign, one of the characters in that, he had one of those terrible, terrible games where he couldn't make a sand check to save his butt. So he just lost an incredible amount in a short amount of time. But when it went below that threshold, that sanity loss slowed down, and that actually allowed him to survive the scenario. Is because everything he saw after that, whatever he rolled, it was only half. And we ended the adventure. He still had a positive number of sanity points, even though he was indefinitely insane. They got the rewards. He got fixed up, and then his sanity was then incrementally going up, at least at the same rate, if not faster, than he was losing it going forward. Because I was still giving him full rewards. Because you could lose 6 points from a deep one. Most he could lose would be 3. But every time he met one, he would do it until he reached 6. Mm-hmm. So the Mythos Hardened, I think, is a cool tool. And I have personally, from my experience, found stuff like permanent insanity. We haven't had it yet. And we've had characters get real close. But that's what stopped it.
It seems like the character sheet should have a checkbox for Mythos Hardened, so that you can
that
mark
is a
it
good point.
and remember that easier.
Because in stuff like Pulp Cthulhu and things, you have Pulp Talents and stuff where those can be special abilities, but that's just something that's in the regular rules. And it does require your character have a Cthulhu Mythos skill, which every time you suffer a bout of madness, your Mythos goes up. That's one that I often forget. Or when you have temporary insanity, your Mythos goes up.
Mm-hmm.
Because you learned something. That's what broke your mind. So, in the first time, you get 5 points to Cthulhu Mythos. So even if a character is not reading Mythos tomes, they're avoiding them, on a long enough timeline, their Cthulhu Mythos is going to be going up just by the stuff they had to learn the hard way, by bouts of madness and whatnot. So eventually, their sanity is going to drop below that. And that's when, like I said, there's a fundamental change.
Yep.
And for campaign play, we have loved it.
Yeah, that would be awesome. You mentioned reading tomes. If I recall correctly, it's because of the extended time that it takes to read a tome that the sanity loss, because you do roll for a sand loss when reading a Mythos tome, does not trigger a bout of madness because it was a prolonged soaking of this sand loss, as opposed to the jump scare effect of meeting a monster. Does that ring true? I believe it.
I have had it happen, but how we did it is instead of it being a standard bout of madness, because I don't think that should be your standard type. What had happened was a character was at home reading the Mythos tome, the Necronomicon or whatever, and failed enough that it resulted in a bout of madness. But she was home by herself. There was no one there. So that's when we pull in the temporary insanity bout of madness that's 10 hours long.
Mm-hmm.
And the character basically went through the house and everything that had anything vaguely reptilian about it, because she developed a phobia of snakes. She dragged out in the front yard and set on fire. And this resulted in the cops getting called. And then another character had to come in and like talk her down. But so her thing is she read this book, and it convinced her that she needed to get rid of all this stuff that was in this big wealthy home that she was in, and she was just dragging antiques out in the yard and setting them ablaze as her part of her madness. And it wasn't until the other characters got there that she was able to snap out of it, and all of a sudden it was like, well, that was a mess. And now now the authorities have gotten involved, and they had to do credit to kind of smooth talk their way out of this. So I don't know. Maybe I did that wrong if that's not a thing. But I don't think that reading a Mythos tome should be the same type of sanity loss as a monster jumps out, because that it's a much slower progression.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I was trying to look it up, but it's not easy to find that. But I will find it at some point. But yeah, I'm glad figuring out about the Mythos hardened versus the becoming used to the
awful.
The awfulness. Yeah, that's good to get that clarified. And coming out of a bout of madness, it even says in the book that it should be a jarring, confusing experience. You find yourself, much like my wife. She discovered herself. Why am I in the hospital? What? I'm sitting here. What's going on? Yeah, you can just kind of find yourself, at the beach or with your hands covered in blood. It should be coming out of a bout of madness should not be a pleasant thing, or it should be jarring.
Oh yeah, I think when we did, I did the adventure Mr. Corbett as a one-on-one adventure with my buddy, and he broke into the house, and there was a thingy, a little creature that he saw, and he went through sanity loss, he had temporary insane, and I didn't tell him exactly what happened. I just kind of said, okay, we're going to do a fade to black. And he woke up about 3 miles away in a ditch, covered in mud and missing a shoe. That he had absolutely no memory of what occurred between when he saw the thing that frightened him and him waking up in a ditch on the opposite side of town on the side of the road, or what the hell happened to his shoe. Now, in the game, he had dropped his flashlight, and the bad guy found this flashlight in his basement and knew something was up. But from the character's point of view, he didn't have it, but he also didn't have a shoe, and he didn't have like some of the other stuff that was on him at the time. And it was just kind of this period of missing time to the character, because he didn't have another PC there to help pull them out. And one of the things that I find more fun with a one-on-one game is you can have that. Or if you're lucky enough that everybody goes into a bout of madness at the same time, we can actually fast forward that 10 hours of like, oh, you guys come to, and this is what you found out you did. We've had a character who decided that she needed to get a hold of her most favorite person. It was an author that she loved. And she kind of came to on a train going to whatever town this author lived in. And she had no memory of how she left where they were when the scary thing happened. She had no idea how she got to the train station, bought a ticket, and got on a train. All she knew is she was on a train to New York. And she'd asked me, like, how did this happen? I just kind of shrugged, like, I don't know. But, we rolled this many hours later, you're on a train. and she's like, well, okay, well, I'll stop once I get to the next town. I'm going to have to buy a ticket and go back. But it was all she knew is she had an obsession. She needed to confer with this most favorite person of hers who lived in New York, and they were adventuring in Maine. So logical thing to do would be get on a train. She's lucky it wasn't a boat. Now, with when you do have a character that's going through a bout of madness or anything, there is a way that the rest of the party, if they're there, can pull them out. And it's one of those skills that nobody ever remembers to get among my players, but they always regret that no one got it. And with psychoanalyze, you can essentially talk them off of it, either by kind of giving them their reality check and pulling them out of their bout of madness to focus up. So if they think that they're hallucinating, that their parents have ordered them to sit down, that's the character that can get them to realize the truth and come out of it. In in one game that I thought was just freaking wonderful, called The Dare, which is a little one shot. It's like your 1980s kids going into a haunted house. They
Hmm.
had changed that one to what's called Be a Pal, because they had taken all the skills in Call of Cthulhu and basically condensed them down to one third. So there are kind of like general areas, like gym class was all your throw and jump and climb skills, and Be a Pal. One of the characters had that pretty high. One of the pre-gens that we used, and that one was amazing at how often that character could talk the panicking kid, because they were all about 12, out of freaking out and focusing up on what was going on. And that was great. That became like the group cleric sort of deal of, so and so's freaking out, get Billy in here and calm him down. And whatever happens, don't let Billy go crazy, because none of us can snap him out of it. But as long as that character that had that ability, at a competent level, was active, he could keep the group focused versus having them go through bouts and go wandering off all these random directions. He was and he would explain how he did it. It might be the slap to the face, or it might be shaking him, or just talking calmly to him. So the player would tell me how he did it, but then we'd roll to see what it did. And if it failed, we could push the roll, and that's why he could escalate how he said he was going to do it. And I think that's also just a skill that is super valuable. And if your group has anyone with it, that character should be protected. Is at least always one worth considering if there's a reason your character would have it, which I think would also include a lot of police, characters and what like that. It doesn't have to just be the psychologist that has that. Somebody that would have to deal with any form of de-escalation, I think that would make complete sense that they would have that skill.
Yes. Yeah. Yeah.
Like a teacher. What do you?
Yep.
I'm an elementary school teacher. I can talk people down.
Get him to calm down.
And then at the end, so we've got the different levels. You've got your temporary insanity and indefinite insanity. How do you do that?
So this is the most mathy, I think, in Call of Cthulhu is 1/5 of your current sanity is an indefinite. It brings about an indefinite insanity. Temporary insanity is a single pop of 5. If you lose 5, then that's when you're going to attempt your idea roll. And if you are successful with
Yeah,
your idea roll, which I love the inverse on this. This is where, having a successful roll is going to bring something negative to you. But if you lose
the smart characters aren't doing well as the dumb one.
exactly right, because they're aligning all that stuff and it's making sense to them, and then they don't like the that 2 plus 2 equals 5 in that situation. But yeah, so with your temporary insanity, if you lose 5 points of sanity in a single pop, that will trigger temporary insanity. It's the indefinite insanity. Characters are, I will have players constantly going, I've lost this much sanity so far. And I'm like, it's okay. You're not at 20% for the day yet. So it's whatever that game day is. If you lose 20%, that opens you up to an indefinite insanity, which can
And
be more debilitating for the character.
it can. And one of the big things with it is it's day. It's not necessarily per adventure.
Mm-hmm.
Sanity rewards are usually at the end of the adventure during the investigator development phase or whatnot. But if you have an adventure, and we've had many that took place over the course of a week, every night when they go home, is providing they're somewhere safe and they don't feel like they're under immediate threat, that's the reset. So we go by whatever their current sanity is when they wake up, and 20% of that down. Now, their sanity over that time, that maximum or that total that they have is probably going down, but the scale is sliding. It's 20% of what they had on that particular day. For me, uh, indefinite insanity usually isn't much different on the surface than temporary insanity. We open with a bout of madness. We can have delusions. We can have insane insights and all of that, just like normal. It's going to last. Usually for me, it lasts until the end of that adventure. And then before the next one on a campaign, I'll usually say, like, what did you do to get through it? And that's when we'll pull in, I went to my most favorite place, or I checked myself into an institution, or I did this, and we'll kind of go through it. But in the end, I'm gonna bring them out of it, and we're gonna start the next session with them being sane again. It's just, if they hit indefinite insanity, they are going through all the issues of insanity until the conclusion of whatever the adventure is. But we, between adventures, we do have a period. Usually we're kind of like 2 months of what did you do, and that's when you'll have characters that might enroll into Vry because they want to learn how to work on a car engine, or
Right.
they might want to go to an asylum, or have go seek therapy, or sometimes they'll just go on a cruise and go to their most favorite place with their most favorite book in the world and all the stuff that's on their character sheet that can help them regain sanity. They'll do that, and we'll check to see what sanity they got. But it almost always ends with them having gotten out of the indefinite part. After that, it's just seeing how much sanity they recover by self healing. Just because I don't find it so much fun for our group for them to start an adventure with somebody who is already insane.
Oh
Because
yeah.
at that point, it's kind of like, well, you have nothing you're working up toward. It might lead to some kind of funny moments, but I don't think that's as fulfilling or as enjoyable as starting sane and working your way toward insanity, and hopefully avoiding it altogether. But that's really the way I handle that.
Yeah, and I like that. The indefinite insanity, which is the deeper sanity, it takes longer, and they've outlined what it would take to recover from indefinite insanity. A couple of things that they've put in the book is private care. You can get the very best in home care, or maybe private care at a very exclusive resort type of community, or the you could be institutionalized in a public asylum, and they have their pros and cons.
One thing with that, when so keepers, I do recommend you name who their therapist or shrink is, because one, this is an NPC that you could bring in. Two, you could make this their most valuable person, because that might be they have their bout of madness, and their one thought is, I need to get a hold of my therapist right now. Or they could hallucinate their therapist standing beside them all of a sudden, or calling them on the phone if you're doing the right time period, going, okay, calm down, remember the breathing exercises we taught you, and stuff like that, even though that's a hallucination. One of the things is that there are so many adventures that take place at asylums or involving different sanitariums and whatnot. If you ever have an idea that you might ever want to use one of those in the future, use that one. And then 2 or 3 games later, you can actually start that adventure, or take that adventure, swap the name of them out with the one that's in there, and now they're having an adventure at the sanitarium or the asylum or whatnot, because this is now an active NPC that you're bringing in. So don't necessarily make if they're getting therapy, don't have it just be a nameless therapist. This is someone that is probably going to become a significant part of that character's life. So when we did that and the adventure Cold Warning, which has a therapist as one of the inciting things in it, that was the character's therapist. That was who showed up when she was in the yard burning all the stuff in the yard. That NPC that I knew on another adventure I was going to murder was her therapist. And he showed up. And then a few adventures later, when that adventure started, the player actually felt a personal connection because I had introduced them earlier because I knew 2 or 3 games in the future I would use him. So keepers definitely role play this out. Don't just go through the mechanics between games and say like, okay, you got therapy, you're healed. Let's get on the next one. Like, no, figure out where the asylum is, or if they're getting private therapy, who's their therapist. Like a big part of The Sopranos. I'm watching The Sopranos for the first time, and like they were on season 4. Is Tony Soprano is always going to his therapist is this recurring thing throughout the whole thing. So make this an active NPC. Or if you're in a crazy pinch, that might be somebody's future character.
Right. Yes. Yeah. Having a named therapist could be a benefit, not just for one PC, but for many of the PCs. This could be someone that is treating all of the characters in this particular group. So with recovery from a indefinite insanity, with temporary, you can mark it by the day, right?
Yeah.
With the indefinite insanity, you mark your recovery by the month. So you determine what kind of facility that you're at. Is it a private care? It'll be more expensive, but it has a much higher success rate. At the end of a month, you roll a D100, and on a 1 through 95, you're cured at the end of
Yeah.
that month. It's only with a 96 to 100. It's only with a fumble where you just haven't been with the program, and you're going to have more of a sand loss. You actually lose more sanity, and you're going to stay, in their care. Hopefully, you're staying in their care for another month. Or if you go with the public institution, a public asylum, they don't have as great a success rate. So it's again, it's at the end of the month. You roll your D100, and it's a 50-50 chance. So if you get 1 through 50%, that's a success. 51 to 95 is just basically nothing happens. No success, but also no failure. And if you fumble on that, just like with the private care, 96 to 100, you suffer additional losses because you've been rebelling against your therapy.
Yeah. Now it's kind of switch gears, I guess, is so sanity loss. Another way that a character can lose sanity loss is often by doing the horrible things. So Call of Cthulhu, we don't have an alignment system like you have in D&D. So there's not your character wouldn't murder a random person because your alignment wouldn't allow it. Call of Cthulhu, it's if your character does something like the first time I ever had to use this, we were playing Blackwater Creek, and one of the characters, like the town, they're getting slowly pulled into this cult, and the characters snuck up to the church at night, and they were basically having a revival in there for this cult of Shub-Niggurath that was popping up, and the characters were discussing locking the doors, setting the place on fire, and burning everyone inside alive. Men, women, children, everyone. And I had to kind of bring up that those people are innocent, and they did know that, and there would be a potential sanity loss there. And by potential, I mean that was my way of saying, like, guys, I will drain your sanity if you murder an entire town because you think it would make it easier on you. So one of the ways when characters, or players might try to do, bad bad, horrible things, such as burn the church down with everyone inside of it. Sanity can be used as a way to help talk them out of it.
Yep. Yep, exactly. In fact, I was first introduced to that notion, which I thought was brilliant, through Scott Glancy and of Pagan Publishing. And he was running, I was listening to an adventure. I think it was Dig to Victory, if I'm remembering correctly. Or it could have been the U boat Rouse scenario that I was listening to. But the characters in that wanted to do something. Yeah, they thought they were being proactive, and they were like, "Yeah, let's do this." And it was, pretty horrific, and it it was not a natural reaction to something that they were facing. It was just them trying to head the evil off at the pass or something, right? By being more evil in that moment. And
Yeah,
he was like,
the murder hobo
yeah, the
moment,
murder hobo moment. And he was like,
and we've
well,
all had it.
he's like,
Eh,
you need to make a sand roll, and you have to fail it. So if you make your sanity, you don't have the guts to do this. You talk yourself out of it, and yeah,
oh,
that was a
I like that. You'll have to make a sand to even do it,
yep. Even
because
to
that's where
do it,
you have like that buck fever of you got yourself all pumped up, or the last second you're like that moral dilemma does hit you of I'm crossing a line. And if they fail their sanity, they're like, nope, no line crossed, let's do it. And now we can go through normal possible repercussions or
yep,
whatever.
yep,
But then on the flip side, I will use sanity as a reward for doing something very truly in character, just or if they do something very good Samaritan-y, I can see that as a not much, like one or a D2. But when you've got games where characters are really tracking that sanity, they're getting real close to that 20%, or they didn't start off with much, due to they're a long character and their sanity's got whittled down, or we've just had a lot of XP loss. If they help somebody, or they do something that's just so good in character, where they're really sticking to the type of stuff that's on the back of the sheet, I'll give them sanity as a way of rewarding good role play. And it's one of those things that like I said, I find it is really a good tool to kind of help steer your players into playing the way you want them to.
yeah,
Encouraging the good behavior of being truly in character or not going murder hobo on you is different ways you can use it.
yes, absolutely. Seth, that was awesome. I really like talking about insanity.
Well, I'm so sorry that your wife went through that. That would have inspired this whole talk. My God, that sounds horrifying. I'm glad she's recovered from it. But if nothing else, I and our listeners will at least have a different way of possibly approaching amnesia. Or if anybody says that's unrealistic, you can say, "Aha." That's not
I
true.
was there on that day.
And well, I guess next time we could probably talk about manias and phobias.
Yes, that'd be great. So let's see if we can bring manias and phobias in on our next conversation. But for now, Seth, we've got some new patrons, so I want to give a shout out to, and I'm sure this was a just an awful name to grow up with. I don't know what parent would do this, but Farty McButterpants. Thank
Ooh,
you so much for your support of the show. We really can't do this without you.
no, thank you, thank you. And we also want to thank George. And
It's your
that's
buddy.
it. Yeah, but at least no unfortunate last name. So yeah, just George.
Just George. And I think this one is pronounced McDomnewell Games.
That looks right.
I hope I have that right. McDominal Games. So thank you for your support. We really do appreciate it.
Thank you.
We will have a link in the show notes to our Patreon account if listeners are interested in supporting the show. Every little dollar helps, so thank you so much. I did just
Thanks, Dave.
add a tip jar level, just a little $3 tip jar. If you're interested in doing that, it'll get you early access to the show when it drops on our Patreon account. So thank you so
Oh,
much.
yeah. Also, if you ever want to just hit us up, talk, maybe ask any questions about something that we might not have touched on, or suggest any future topics that you'd like us to touch on, or just come by and chat, we do have a Discord server that we have a lot of different conversations and whatnot on. So we'll stick the links in the show notes for that. Just swing by, hit us up. We do a different one for each episode. So that way, once you've listened to this episode, if there's anywhere you want to say, hey, I like that, could you expand on it, or you guys are wrong, swing by, hit us up on the Discord. Or if you have any ideas for anything you want us to elaborate on, by all means, please swing by and just give us a hello.
Yeah, our Discord's getting more and more lively, so it's fun. So please come by. And if you are a fan of YouTube, which I feel like some of us are, you can find this show eventually on YouTube as well. So you can watch us and listen to us there. Although watch us is a misnomer. It's not a video of us, but Seth does an amazing job of kind of animating and adding in some cards, like a
Yeah.
slideshow for
Yeah.
this. So thank you for your efforts and work on that, Seth.
I throw up to at least visual references of what we're talking about. That way, it's not just staring at a non-moving screen for an hour listening to us chat. So that's not a problem at all.
It's fun, and it gets a lot of traffic. So check us out on YouTube, and we will also have an RSS link in the show notes, and that takes it right from our Libsyn site, so you can download and listen to the show from there as well. Just put it in your favorite podcatcher. We cannot do this show alone. We want to thank our amazing editors, Max Mahaffa and Edwin Nagy, for their very hard work in making us sound as if we're intelligent.
As if we don't have 3 minutes of dead air.
Yeah. So big shout outs to those guys. Thank you so much.
We also want to thank John Sumrow for our badass logo. He's a very talented artist, so please follow him on Facebook. Check out his official website. Please consider joining his Patreon account. Once again, links in the show notes. And one interesting thing with John Sumrow is, did you see the Modern Mythos little reference in some of his art that he did for the Book of Cults?
I did.
I don't know how that got in there, but he was an artist for that book, and somebody that's very keen observer might notice our logo somewhere in there. So thank you, John.
Yes, thank you, John. That is so awesome. And finally, we want to thank the Darkest of the Hillside Thickets for generously allowing us to use their song Gluttony as our intro and outro music. If you're a fan of Lovecraft's writing and the Call of Cthulhu role-playing game, then you really need to check out this band, the Darkest of the Hillside Thickets. Check out their Bandcamp site and their official band site. Links for those will also be in the show notes.
Thanks for listening.
Thank you.